now got three speakers who are going to address some of those issues. This is how it's going to work. I'm going to ask each of them a question. They're going to answer it in a minute. And then we're going to move into a panel discussion with me and then a wider discussion with a Q&A from the floor and also from Slido. So first of all, I'm going to ask Detective Superintendent Chris Baker from Leicestershire Police. Chris is going to answer this question for a minute, then we'll come on to the others and then a panel discussion. So Chris, if you'd like to kick off first of all with this, you're a good performing force in terms of out-of-court disposals. What's going right?
I think what's going right is the fact that we've embedded the two-tier framework since 2014. So we were, along with West Yorkshire and Staffordshire, one of the pilot forces. So I can sit here all smug and say we've got it embedded and we've got it perfectly right. We haven't. But what we have got the benefit of is well-established relationships with interventions, and we've got 5 main interventions that we put in place for male offenders aged 18 to 24, female offenders, a service called Turning Point, which is a health intervention for drug and alcohol misuse, and that's for male offenders as well. We've got the victim awareness course, which is victim support led, and then we have another service which is the later service. It's CARA, which is the Hampton Trust, and I know Emma's here from the Hampton Trust today, for domestic abuse, and that's been really, really productive in terms of reducing reoffending in domestic abuse. So I think it's those fairly simple. It's simple for officers to understand the prescribing. They know who to refer to, and each of those interventions then has a bespoke service referring to different partners, different services, for having taken into consideration the individual's needs. Thank
you very much. Next question is to Detective Superintendent Katie Harber from the Met Police. Katie has been involved with the North West London Turning Point randomised control trial. Katie, there is, as we know, scepticism about how well diversion works to reduce reoffending and improve victim satisfaction. How has your trial helped demonstrate to police colleagues that diversion can work for the public good?
Thank you. Because we ran our trial as a randomised control trial split across 3 age groups, we've been able to track the reoffending results. So our interim results show that a year after being randomised into the Turning Point deferred prosecution trial, there was a reduction of 58% in terms of new charges for offenders who were put through Turning Point compared to those who were cautioned or charged as normal. It's right to say there was scepticism to start, but we did a lot of stakeholder engagement prior to doing the start of the trial. And we always said we weren't necessarily wedded to the outcome. We were wedded to running a really good trial that allowed us to see what the results were to allow us to test and improve. And that really helped us get police officer engagement in the trial.
Thank you very much. Next question is to Detective Inspector Jim Holmes from Thames Valley Police, sitting at the far end there. Jim is the out-of-court disposal lead for Thames Valley. And at Thames Valley, I know that they have run some very successful diversion schemes. How has that been achieved?
I think when we started off with our out-of-court disposals programme in 2019, we went from a very low bar, but we had very clear Chief Constable management team buy-in and support, very clear criminal justice management team buy-in, and also very clear and very strong local commander buy-in as well. So we were able to go in with the support of the local policing leaders, and we pitched it at officers as being a way of actually giving your victims a voice, but giving your offenders an opportunity. Because knowing that victim care and the victim contact programme was coming out, it actually gives officers a really meaningful way of getting their victims' views whilst processing out-of-court disposal. If you use an out-of-court disposal on a guilty plea case, you're not doing file build. Now, file build now for guilty plea case is the same for not guilty case. And I don't know what it is in all your forces, but when I speak to our officers, file build for a guilty plea case, which would have taken under an hour 5 years ago, is now taking 6, 7, 8 hours because of redaction, DG6, etc. You turn around and say, well, you can do a conditional caution in 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now moving on to a panel discussion. And I just want to pick up, Jim, from what you're saying there. It sounds like a no-brainer, right? Anyone listening to that? And also, Katie, the results that you've demonstrated, that you've talked about. I mean, it sounds like someone's got to put rocket boosters under the Home Office and police forces and just tell them to get on with it and do it. So why isn't that happening? Because we've been talking about this for years. We're now seeing the results. So why doesn't that happen? What's the blockage?
I think that's probably above our pay grade a little bit. But if I could talk about it from a detective superintendent perspective responsible for 3 London boroughs, what I found was the success factors to get the results we got was a real focus on quality implementation. Now that sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but actually policing doesn't have a great track record for delivering bits and processes of what we deliver very well. And we had to have a real focus on tracking delivery. Peter's already mentioned that. That was absolutely crucial, and that had to be daily. And what I mean is checking that your eligible cases have all actually gone through the system, because you will find, I'm going to sound a little bit frivolous here, but cops will cut the corners off a circle. Now that's a really good, strong trait when you're trying to problem solve things, but it does mean on certain things that things can go a bit awry. And when you apply the breadth of officer discretion, actually you get this inconsistency of outcomes. So you need a really good system that is tracked to monitor your implementation. And I've got some points that I'll pass on to the others later around the key 6 points I would say you need in a really good out-of-court disposal system.
I mean, I think there is still a perception, and it was touched upon in the last presentation, that out-of-court disposals are somehow a soft option. I think I certainly saw in my force early on that there was some resistance from chief officers to that 2-tier, and that saw an increase in use. And the cultural resistance was around charging was king. And really refreshing to hear some of the research that Peter and colleagues have done that proves it's not. That for me was the biggest obstacle, to convince chief officer teams that actually this is the right thing, it's not a soft option. And
now what's the view when you speak to your senior officers?
That has changed.
It has changed.
Have I changed it totally? 100% no. I think there is still some perception that charging is better. We are roughly 50-50 split now between all of our positive outcomes between out of court and court. I think sometimes necessity is the mother of invention in the court system. I think has convinced, and the time saved has convinced them that it is the right thing. But I think we've got to think, what's the right thing for the victim? What's the right thing for the offender? And we should think about victims in this, because we have a duty under the Victims Code to consult on out-of-court disposals. Our research, we survey regularly on out-of-court disposals, is 83% satisfaction. So that's higher than all crime. So I think that proves that point.
Jim, what about, I mean, Thames Valley has been a pioneer in this field for quite a long time, and in other innovative policing techniques and tools, but other forces just haven't caught up. Why?
I think there's competing demands on chief constables. So when we heard from Mr. Cook, we heard about, well, there's a declining charge rate. Well, if you use more out-of-court disposals, then your charge rate's going to go down, because you're going to be using it in those mostly guilty plea cases. So then a chief will be questioned by the PCC, why aren't you charging more people? Or we're using more out-of-court disposals. Well, what does that mean? Is that necessarily a good outcome? I think outcome 22 has a valuable place, but it's unattractive to some forces because we are measured on results, and those results are charge, caution, mostly charge, and conditional caution, or diversion of caution, community caution as they're going to become. So our actual performance framework that's given to us by the government and the HMIC FRS doesn't necessarily support us innovating and going into out-of-court disposals, because the first thing that's reported is charge rates are going down, the police are going soft. And actually, for us, it makes operational sense for our staff because it saves them time, it reduces court backlog, it gives better victim satisfaction, and actually it's successful in diverting offenders. And then the courts will come in and say, well, the police are overusing them. Well, of course, they're going to say that because they're less busy, so they're going to get closed, so they haven't got anything to do.
I don't think there's any risk of that at the moment.
But that's the narrative. We don't want out-of-court disposals because it means they're out of court. Therefore, what we do is we're going to become redundant. So until there's a collaborative approach from all the agencies outside of the police and those that hold us accountable to say we support out of court as an approach, you will find chief constables and PCCs resistant to doing it because they fear that performance drop off and that criticism.
One of the key problems, I guess, is to make sure that all your officers, and you've got so many new officers coming in, are aware of the potential of out-of-court disposals, what they are, etc. How do you sort of keep it on the radar?
I mean, having lived this experience of the difficulties of training, and it's the old adage of painting the fourth bridge. We just keep repeating and repeating training. We have got to hear about Make Time Count in the very early days of Project Fulcrum, and came on board part as a critical friend, but part interested in the decision-making tool for me, because what I said, things weren't perfect at the start. What I see is some inconsistency in decision-making. Some lack of awareness of what is out there, even though we have 5 simple pathways into much more in-depth needs assessment.
Final question of this session.
Thanks. I've got a question for Katie. Congratulations on those staggering results. I'm really looking forward to reading the report when it comes out. I was just wondering if you have an opinion on whether the positive results you're seeing in your scheme are to do with the positive impact of what you're diverting people to, or the absence of the negative impact of treatment as usual.
Really good question. And I should say my trial isn't set up to test that. So if we're going to be data-driven, we've got to be very open around what different types of evaluation technique can and can't tell you. So my hunch would be it's the removal of the admission of guilt, I think, is massive, because you are creating a level playing field around the outcome somebody gets and their relative risk of reoffending. So you're taking that combination away. But I do think you have to have quality interventions to make this work. And on our trial, we had a project team of 4 people looking after 3 London boroughs. Every offender that was eligible was entitled to be diverted through the scheme. So we didn't cherry pick, we didn't pick and choose. But we had a really good relationship with our partners through the local authorities and local charities, so that we had a bank of about 60 intervention providers that might range from a one-man band charity that would operate in a tiny locality to something that might be pan-London or national. And the offender managers we recruited, we got really lucky. We got very bright, enthusiastic, well-motivated people that wanted to make a difference, who thought really creatively around what kind of interventions they could use. And they found, for example, a construction company in King's Cross, desperate for workers, would say, if you refer us someone, we will train them to be a crane operator. They will complete that course and they will have a guaranteed job at the end. Now, that's pretty cool. And we should be encouraging that kind of innovation and really tailoring the response to the offender according to their criminogenic need and what may work for them in consultation with them too. And I should have mentioned that in terms of victim satisfaction, our results show no reduction in victim satisfaction. We had 83% satisfied versus 81% from business as usual. But for a scheme to work, there has got to be parity of victim and offender focus. And I think it's very easy, as we've seen this morning, for these kind of schemes to really start focusing on the offender, and we kind of treat the victim as secondary, and unless you build your victim care into your workflow process, unfortunately that slips away, and we've got to be really conscious of that.
Your final report is coming out next month, did you say?
Not quite. I've got a second interim report next month, and the final report will be 2024, when every offender will have done 2 years at risk.
Right, well, we look forward to the second interim report next month. Thank you very much. Katie, Chris, Jim, can everyone please show their appreciation?